zero point 0.5. Tonight we uncover a secret so tightly guarded, so dangerous, that the Vatican didn't just hide it, they tried to erase it. Hidden deep within their vaults are star charts, so forbidden, so powerful, they could challenge the very foundation of the Church itself. These ancient maps of the heavens, filled with cosmic truths, were once used to guide the course of empires, predict the rise and fall of kings, and shape the future of mankind. But as the Church's grip on power grew, these star charts were locked away, labelled as heresy and erased from history. The priests who dared study them, they vanished into silence, their names forgotten, their knowledge erased from the pages of time. But the truth, like the stars themselves, refuses to remain hidden. In the darkness of the Vatican's secret archives, the echoes of this forbidden knowledge still wait to be uncovered. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. There is a secret written in the stars, one that the Vatican doesn't want you to know. A secret so powerful, it could change everything we've ever been taught about history, religion, and the universe itself. What if the stars above us weren't just celestial bodies, but keys to a hidden truth? A truth buried by the very people who claim to hold the answers to all life's questions. Imagine a time when the Church didn't just control the Word of God, but also the power of the heavens. The Vatican knew the stars held secrets, secrets that were forbidden, secrets that could unlock doors to knowledge the Church was desperate to keep locked away. But what if, in the shadows of the Vatican, the priests and scholars of the Church were keeping their own star charts, charts that could reveal something far more profound than any religious doctrine? It wasn't always this way. Long before the Vatican's grip on the Western world, astrology was a respected science, an art, and a tool of understanding. In ancient Egypt, Greece, and even Rome, the stars were seen as guides, as maps to the future. Astrologers were respected figures, consulted by kings and emperors. Their wisdom sought to predict battles, harvests, and royal births. The idea that the stars held the answers to the great questions of life was not only accepted, but celebrated. Astrology was seen as a way to read the will of the gods, a divine language that, if understood, could bring knowledge and wisdom to those who were brave enough to learn it. But then, something changed. With the rise of Christianity, the Vatican began to assert control over knowledge, and astrology, once revered, was now considered a threat to the Church's authority. The power of the stars was no longer seen as a way to understand the universe, but as a challenge to the very teachings of the Bible. As the centuries passed, the Vatican began to erase all traces of astrology from the public eye, hiding star charts, astrological texts, and the teachings of ancient scholars. The Church wanted to keep the stars locked away, to control what was known about them. It wasn't just about denying the science, it was about controlling the narrative. Astrology, once a tool of wisdom, became something darker, something to be feared. In the midst of this, the Vatican quietly built its own collection of forbidden star charts, charts that detailed celestial events, astronomical alignments, and predictions that reached far beyond the pages of the Bible. These charts were not for the eyes of the public. They were hidden away in the Vatican's private chambers, their existence known to only a select few. But why? What were these charts showing? What did the Vatican hope to achieve by keeping the stars locked behind stone walls and iron gates? And why, despite the Vatican's best efforts, have whispers of these forbidden star charts managed to slip through the cracks of history? The answers are lost in time, buried beneath centuries of secrecy. But one thing is certain. The stars above us may hold the key to understanding a past that the Church would rather forget. This story, the story of astrology in the Vatican, is just the beginning. The secrets that lie hidden in the stars are waiting to be uncovered, if only we're brave enough to look up. Imagine for a moment that the stars above you aren't just dots of light in the night sky, but powerful symbols of a much deeper truth, a truth the Church didn't want you to know. For centuries, the Vatican waged a secret war against astrology, an ancient practice that, to many, seemed to hold the keys to the mysteries of the universe. The cosmic struggle between the Church and the stars wasn't just about science. It was about control. It was about who got to decide what knowledge would shape the world, and who would be left in the dark. For early Christians, astrology was a practice tied to ancient beliefs, beliefs that went back to Babylon, Egypt, and Greece, where the stars were seen as divine messages, guiding everything from kings' decisions to daily life. But, for the Vatican, astrology posed a serious threat. If the stars could tell the future, then perhaps the Church didn't hold the only key to understanding God's will. That idea was dangerous. It threatened the Church's power, and that was something the Vatican would not allow. In the early centuries of Christianity, astrology was embraced by many. Scholars like Ptolemy, who lived around 150 years before the birth of Christ, were deeply invested in studying the stars. They believed the movements of the planets had a direct influence on human affairs. Ptolemy's work, Tetrabiblos, laid the foundation for how astrology was practiced for centuries, mixing science, mathematics, and spirituality. But as Christianity spread across Europe, the Church began to view astrology not as a science, but as a pagan practice that went against Christian teachings. They couldn't accept the idea that the stars, or the heavens, had power over human destiny. To the Church, only God had that authority, and anything that threatened that belief was considered heretical. By the 5th century, as the Roman Empire fell, the Vatican began to solidify its control over European thought, and astrology, along with many other ancient practices, was pushed into the shadows. The tension between astrology and the Church reached its height during the Middle Ages. With the rise of the Catholic Church, the stars became more than just a source of knowledge. They became a symbol of something much darker. The Church began to suppress astrological knowledge, labeling it as evil and heretical. Inquisitors hunted down anyone who practiced astrology, or any form of knowledge that challenged the Vatican's version of truth. Astronomers who once studied the heavens with respect were forced to toe the line, refraining from any discussion of astrology. This cosmic struggle between science and religion wasn't just intellectual, it was deeply spiritual. The Vatican saw itself as the ultimate authority on all matters of life and death, including the mysteries of the universe. Astrology, with its promise of hidden knowledge and power, was seen as an enemy of God's will, a force that could lead people astray. Despite the Church's efforts to erase astrology from public consciousness, some scholars and astronomers secretly continued their work. They knew that the stars still held secrets, secrets that could unlock the past and guide the future. They worked in the shadows, keeping their findings hidden from the prying eyes of the Church. Some even went so far as to write coded messages in their star charts, passing on forbidden knowledge that the Vatican tried to bury. But For every scholar who defied the church, there were many more who fell silent, too afraid to speak out against the Vatican's overwhelming power. The cosmic struggle continued, with the church firmly in control, but the stars, as always, remained above, waiting to be rediscovered. Behind the Vatican's towering walls, a quiet conflict raged for centuries, one that the world was never meant to see. It wasn't a war fought with swords or armies, but with ideas, with knowledge, and with control over the minds of millions. The Vatican, as the guardian of Christian faith, held an enormous amount of power, not just spiritually, but intellectually. The Church controlled what people could learn, what they could believe, and most importantly, what they were allowed to know about the universe. But there was a problem. The stars above us, those shining lights in the night sky, held secrets that threatened the Vatican's tight grip on truth. As early as the 4th century, the Church began to quietly suppress astrology, a practice that had been respected for thousands of years. This silent conflict wasn't just about rejecting astrology as a pagan belief, it was about something much deeper. Astrology promised to reveal the universe's hidden order, something that the Church feared would challenge its teachings. The Vatican's response to astrology was not immediate or loud, but it was strategic. As the Christian faith spread through Europe, the Church started to distance itself from the ancient teachings of Babylon, Greece, and Rome. Astrologers were no longer seen as wise advisors, but as dangerous practitioners of heresy. The Church feared that astrology, with its complex understanding of celestial movements and their influence on earthly events, could lead people to think there were forces outside of God's will controlling the world. For the Vatican, this wasn't just a theological issue, it was a matter of control. If people started looking to the stars for answers, then perhaps they wouldn't rely on the Church to guide them through life's most important questions. The true conflict remained hidden, not just from the world, but from the very people who were living it. Church leaders in the Vatican were well aware of astrology's power. They knew that for centuries the stars had been used to guide kings, generals, and philosophers. The ancient Greeks and Romans had built their empires with the knowledge of the stars, and the Church was not blind to that. In fact, the Vatican had its own astronomers and scholars, some of whom studied the stars in secret. But the Church could not allow astrology to flourish outside its control. What most people didn't realize was that, in the quiet halls of the Vatican, there were whispers of astrology's power. Or some church leaders tried to convince themselves that astrology could coexist with Christianity, but they knew it was a dangerous belief. Too much knowledge could unravel everything they had worked to build. As time went on, the Vatican's suppression of astrology grew more systematic. The Church excommunicated those who dared to practice it openly, burning books and banning texts that contained astrological knowledge. But even in the face of such force, astrology didn't disappear. It survived in hidden corners, passed down in secret, preserved by a few brave scholars and astrologers who refused to let the knowledge of the stars vanish. These men and women became the silent rebels of history, risking their lives to keep alive the knowledge that the Vatican sought to erase. And as the centuries passed, the Vatican's quiet war against astrology continued, with the Church controlling what could be known and shaping the beliefs of generations. Yet, even in its most powerful moments, the Vatican could never fully silence the stars. They remained above, waiting to be understood. Long before the Vatican's attempts to erase astrology from the minds of the people, the stars were seen as much more than distant objects in the sky. They were guides, guardians, and even gods in the eyes of the ancients. For thousands of years, civilizations like the Babylonians, Egyptians, and Greeks believed that the movements of the stars held the answers to life's greatest questions. To them, astrology wasn't just a form of prediction. It was a way to understand the very structure of the universe. In ancient Babylon, around the 8th century BCE, priests would sit in temples, carefully studying the heavens. They mapped out the positions of the stars and planets, noting how their alignments seemed to influence the world below. The Babylonians believed the stars were the mouthpieces of the gods, telling stories about the past and predicting what would come in the future. These early astrologers created some of the first star charts, charting the movement of planets like Jupiter and Saturn, and they saw these celestial bodies as symbols of divine will. By the time ancient Greece rose to power, astrology had become a respected science, studied by the brightest minds of the era. Philosophers like Plato and Aristotle were not only interested in astronomy, but in the deeper connections between the stars and human existence. For them, the heavens were a reflection of the harmony and order that governed the universe. Plato, for example, believed that the stars were part of a divine plan, and that understanding their movements could bring insight into human nature and destiny. In Greece, astrology wasn't just for kings and generals. It was a part of daily life. Ordinary people believed their fates were intertwined with the stars, and astrologers were sought after for advice on everything from marriage to the timing of harvests. The Greeks didn't just look at the stars for guidance. They created entire systems of thought around the patterns they saw in the sky. One of the most influential figures in this tradition was the philosopher and mathematician Ptolemy, who lived in Alexandria during the 2nd century CE. Ptolemy's work, particularly his book Tetrabiblos, became the foundation for Western astrology for centuries. He was the first to put together a detailed theory about how the positions of planets and stars influenced human affairs. His ideas were so groundbreaking that they remained dominant even through the rise of Christianity and the eventual suppression of astrology. In Egypt, the connection between the stars and religion was even more deeply rooted. The Egyptians built their pyramids and temples in alignment with the stars, and they believed the stars were a part of the gods' eternal design. The most famous of these alignments can be seen in the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is precisely aligned with the star Sirius, a key figure in Egyptian astrology. To the Egyptians, the stars were a map to the afterlife, guiding the souls of the dead to the heavens. These ancient civilizations didn't just see astrology as a tool for predicting the future, they saw it as a divine language, a way to read the will of the gods. And for a time, this knowledge was shared freely, passed down through generations of scholars and priests. But as Christianity spread across Europe, the once respected science of astrology began to be pushed to the margins, labeled as superstition and paganism. The Church saw the power of astrology as a threat to its authority and began a systematic campaign to suppress it. Despite this, the ancient knowledge didn't disappear entirely. It was hidden away, preserved in secret manuscripts, and passed down in whispers. The stars, once seen as a divine language, were now something to fear. Yet, even in the face of such suppression, the legacy of ancient astrology remained, waiting for a time when it would be rediscovered. For much of history, the stars weren't just something to admire from a distance. They were believed to have the power to shape lives, decisions, and even entire civilizations. From the ancient Egyptians to the rulers of the Roman Empire, the stars were seen as divine guides, steering the course of events and influencing the fates of kings, soldiers, and ordinary people alike. Throughout the centuries, astrologers were sought after by the powerful, trusted to interpret the heavens and offer advice on everything from warfare to the timing of major life events. The influence of the stars wasn't just confined to a few isolated civilizations. It was a global belief system that crossed borders and stretched across cultures. In ancient Rome, astrology became an essential tool for emperors and military leaders. The Emperor Augustus, who ruled from 27 BCE to 14 CE, was particularly fascinated by astrology. He even went so far as to commission astrologers to create a birth chart for him, believing that his rise to power was written in the stars. Augustus relied on astrology to guide his decisions, believing that celestial events were signs of divine favor, and he used this belief to strengthen his political position. Emperors like him were not alone in their faith in the stars. Roman generals and politicians also turned to astrologers for insight on military strategies, alliances, and the right time to make critical moves. The influence of astrology didn't end with the fall of the Roman Empire. In the Middle Ages, rulers across Europe continued to seek the wisdom of the stars. Even the Catholic Church, which later tried to suppress astrology, couldn't escape the influence of the celestial bodies. While the Church officially condemned astrology as heresy, many of its leaders privately consulted astrologers. The Church itself had its own astronomers, some of whom secretly studied astrology, understanding its power even if they denied its legitimacy. The connection between the stars and power wasn't just political, it was deeply personal as well. People from all walks of life believed that the stars could influence their destinies, shaping everything from their careers to their relationships. In the Middle Ages, people would often consult astrologers to choose the right time for a wedding or to seek advice on their health. It wasn't just the wealthy who sought out this knowledge. Astrology was woven into the fabric of daily life. The belief in the stars' influence was so strong that even the rise and fall of empires seemed to be tied to celestial events. In the years after the fall of the Roman Empire, astrologers in both Europe and the Middle East believed that the movements of the planets and stars could signal the rise of new powers or the fall of old ones. Many of the great conquerors, including Charlemagne, who ruled from 776 to 814, and later figures like Napoleon, looked to the heavens for guidance, consulting astrologers before making major decisions. As time went on, astrology's influence continued to grow, even as it faced growing opposition from the Church. Throughout the Renaissance, astrology was considered an essential part of learning and scholarship. It was not only a spiritual or mystical pursuit, but also a scientific one. Scholars like Johannes Kepler, who lived from 1571 to 1630, and Tycho Brahe, who lived from 1546 to 1600, made significant advancements in astronomy and astrology. They recognized the stars as more than just decoration in the sky. They saw them as an essential part of understanding the natural world. Kepler, who is often considered the father of modern astronomy, relied on astrology in his work, believing that the movements of the planets were intertwined with the larger mysteries of the universe. Even though the Church worked tirelessly to suppress astrology's influence, the stars never truly lost their grip on the human imagination. Whether it was a king consulting an astrologer before a battle, or a farmer choosing the best time to plant crops, the stars continued to influence decisions at every level of society. The Church's efforts to control astrology may have slowed its influence, but the belief in the power of the stars never truly disappeared. It lay hidden, waiting for the right time to resurface. In the 16th century, a seemingly simple change in the way the world measured time would have far-reaching consequences. This change, known as the Gregorian calendar, was introduced by Pope Gregory XIII in 1572, and it was not just about adjusting dates. It was a strategic move that reflected the Vatican's increasing control over knowledge, power, and even the heavens. For centuries, the Julian calendar had been in use, a system introduced by Julius Caesar in 45 BCE, which had helped track the days and months of the year. However, by the 16th century, it was clear that this calendar was not perfect. It had a small but significant flaw. It didn't account for the fact that a year is not exactly 365 days long. This discrepancy caused the calendar to slowly drift out of sync with the solar year, which, over time, meant that important events like Easter were being celebrated on the wrong dates. The problem wasn't just mathematical, it was theological. The date of Easter was a central issue for the Church, as it was based on the spring equinox and the cycles of the moon, both of which were tied to astrological principles. As the calendar drifted further out of alignment with the natural world, it became increasingly difficult for the Church to maintain control over these key religious observances. Pope Gregory, understanding both the practical and spiritual implications of this problem, set about reforming the system. In 1572, he introduced the Gregorian calendar, a new system designed to fix the drift by removing 10 days from the calendar. October 4th of that year was followed by October 15th, effectively skipping 10 days to bring the calendar back into alignment with the solar year. At the same time, Gregory also adjusted the leap year system to better account for the difference between the actual length of a year and the one the Julian calendar used. On the surface, the Gregorian calendar was a solution to a scientific problem. But it was more than just about dates and mathematics. The Church's decision to implement this new system also gave it the power to regulate time itself. By changing the way time was measured, the Vatican could control not only the dates of religious holidays, but also influence the daily lives of millions of people. The Gregorian calendar didn't just reshape the way people thought about time, it reshaped how they understood the world. The stars, the sun, and the moon were now aligned in a way that was acceptable to the Church, providing a framework for the spiritual and the scientific to coexist under Vatican control. However, this wasn't a universally accepted change. Many Protestant countries, which had already broken away from the Catholic Church, resisted the Gregorian reforms. They viewed the calendar as another example of papal overreach, a way for the Vatican to extend its authority over the world's daily rhythms. It wasn't until much later that countries like Britain and its colonies, including what would become the United States, adopted the Gregorian calendar in the late 1700s. The Vatican's influence over time itself was a powerful tool, one that would prove useful for centuries to come. By controlling the calendar, the Church didn't just dictate when Easter would fall or how people would track the seasons. It influenced how people understood the passage of time and by extension, how they understood their place in the universe. Time became a force that could be regulated, manipulated, and aligned with the Church's teachings, keeping the stars and the heavens under its watchful eye. Pope Gregory's calendar reform was not just about fixing a mathematical problem. It was about maintaining the Vatican's control over knowledge, the stars, and even the flow of history itself. Behind the Vatican's walls, hidden away in its most secure chambers, there lies a collection of ancient knowledge, carefully guarded and kept from the world. These are not just religious texts or theological writings, but something far more dangerous to the Church's carefully constructed narrative: the secret star charts of the Vatican. These charts, believed to have been created by some of the most brilliant minds in the history of astronomy and astrology, document the movements of the stars, planets, and celestial events that have shaped human history. The Vatican's fear of astrology wasn't just based on superstition, it was about control. The stars held secrets that, if unlocked, could potentially reveal truths that challenged the very foundation of Christian doctrine. The Church's desire to suppress this knowledge didn't just stem from a rejection of pagan practices, but from a deep-seated fear that astrology could undermine the Vatican's claim to divine authority. These secret charts were not casually left around for anyone to see. They were carefully hidden, tucked away in vaults and libraries where only the highest-ranking church officials had access. Some of these charts date back to the early Christian era, possibly even as far back as the 4th century. They were said to have been passed down through generations of scholars, many of whom were sworn to secrecy. The stars, the planets, and their movements were seen as more than just a reflection of the heavens. They were keys to understanding the divine order of the universe, keys the Vatican wanted to keep locked away. The Church, in its effort to maintain absolute control, began to purge much of the astrological knowledge that had been passed down from ancient civilizations. But despite its best efforts, the Vatican couldn't fully erase the charts. They were preserved in secret, sometimes in the private collections of priests, scholars, or astronomers who understood the importance of the knowledge they contained. What's most intriguing about these secret star charts is the possibility that they reveal events that the Vatican wanted to keep hidden. Some believe these charts don't just document the positions of the stars. They document key moments in history, moments that were directly influenced by celestial events. There are claims that some of the most significant events in church history, such as the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of kings, and even the timing of major battles, were guided by astrological forces. If this is true, it would mean that the Church, instead of relying solely on divine intervention, was using the stars as a tool to shape its destiny. But why would the Vatican go to such lengths to conceal this knowledge? The answer lies in the Church's desire for power. The stars, if understood and interpreted correctly, could reveal a deeper, more complex understanding of the universe that went beyond the teachings of the Bible. If people knew how much influence the stars had over their lives, they might question the Church's control. What the Vatican feared most was that astrology, with its power to predict and understand the future, could challenge the idea that the Church alone held the keys to knowledge and salvation. This is why the secret charts of the Vatican remained hidden for centuries. The charts, locked away in the Vatican's archives, represented more than just astrological data. They were symbols of the Church's deepest fears. If the truth about the stars were to be revealed, It might just unravel the Church's carefully constructed narrative of control and authority. The secrets that lie within these charts are waiting to be uncovered, but whether the Vatican will ever allow them to see the light of day is a question that still remains. In the dimly lit chambers of the Vatican, there once lived an astrologer whose name, over the centuries, would be whispered only in the most secretive circles. He was a man who understood the power of the stars better than most, a man who knew that the heavens held more than just the answers to personal fortunes. This astrologer, whose work could have changed the course of history, was cursed by the very knowledge he uncovered. His story is one of brilliance, but also of tragedy, for the truth he sought to reveal was too dangerous for the world to see. His name has been lost to time, but the consequences of his discoveries have echoed through history. The astrologer's tale begins in the late 15th century, a time when the Church was still firmly in control of both spiritual and intellectual life in Europe. The Catholic Church held the reins of knowledge, deciding what could be known and what would remain hidden. Astrology, once seen as a noble science, had long been condemned by the Vatican as a heretical practice. Yet, in the quietest corners of the Church, some continued to study the stars in secret. The astrologer in question was one of these brave souls. He had access to ancient texts, star charts, and astronomical data that had been hidden for centuries. He spent years poring over these secrets, meticulously studying the alignments of the stars, the movements of the planets, and the hidden patterns that seemed to govern the world. As he delved deeper into his studies, the astrologer uncovered something that could have changed the way humanity saw itself. His star charts were not just maps of the night sky. They were records of celestial events that coincided with pivotal moments in history. His research revealed a strange pattern, one that connected the rise and fall of empires, the births of great leaders, and the destruction of entire civilizations to specific alignments of the stars. The astrologer believed that these cosmic events were not mere coincidences. He believed that the stars held the key to understanding the fate of mankind, and that by understanding these patterns, one could predict the future. But as his discoveries grew more profound, so did the danger he posed to the Vatican's authority. If the Church's secrets were to be exposed, the very foundation of its power might crumble. The astrologer knew the risk he was taking, but the knowledge he had uncovered was too important to ignore. His star charts contained the truth, and he believed that it was his duty to share it with the world. However, the Vatican had other plans. Word of his findings eventually reached the higher echelons of the Church, and it didn't take long for them to recognize the threat he represented. The astrologer was swiftly silenced, his work dismissed as heretical, and his life taken away from him in the most brutal of ways. Whether it was through excommunication, imprisonment, or worse, the Church made sure that his voice was never heard. His star charts, which could have shown humanity a new way to understand its place in the universe, were lost to history. Some say that his works were destroyed, hidden away in the deepest vaults of the Vatican, where they remain to this day, sealed off from the world. His curse was not just one of death, but of forgotten knowledge, a tragedy that echoes through the centuries. The astrologer's curse wasn't just that he paid with his life for uncovering forbidden truths, but that the knowledge he held was buried, never to be shared with the world. The stars remained silent, their secrets locked away, waiting for someone brave enough to unlock them once again. Throughout the centuries, there were those who, despite the Vatican's oppressive stance on astrology, continued to study the stars. These individuals, often overlooked by history, were the silent astronomers of the Church. They were men and women of extraordinary intellect, working behind the closed doors of monasteries and secretive chambers, dedicating their lives to understanding the heavens. These astronomers were the ones who peered through the earliest telescopes, mapping out the stars with precision and attempting to decipher the mysteries of the universe that the Church had tried so hard to keep hidden. But despite their groundbreaking work, they were bound by a rule. They could never speak too loudly. To do so would invite suspicion, punishment, and even death. They knew that the Church would not tolerate any public discourse on astrology, nor would it allow the stars to be seen as anything more than symbols of divine creation. They understood the risks, so their discoveries were quietly recorded, their observations shared only in whispered circles. One of the most notable figures among these silent astronomers was Johannes Kepler, who lived from 1571 to 1630. Kepler, often considered one of the founders of modern astronomy, was a man caught between his passion for the stars and the strict religious doctrine of the Church. Kepler's work on the motion of planets, his laws of planetary motion, revolutionized the understanding of the universe. Yet, even as his work brought him fame, Kepler knew he had to tread carefully. The Church was not kind to those who stepped too far outside the accepted teachings of the Bible. In fact, many of his ideas, particularly his belief in the heliocentric model of the universe, the idea that the Earth revolved around the Sun, were considered heretical. Kepler, however, was not deterred. He quietly worked to prove the accuracy of his theories, writing them down in journals and scientific papers. But he understood that these ideas would never be accepted by the mainstream, at least not while he was alive. He relied on his faith to justify his work, always careful to frame his discoveries in a way that would not invite the wrath of the Vatican. Kepler's silent rebellion against the Church's rigid control over knowledge was shared by others like him. Tycho Brahe, a Danish nobleman and astronomer who lived from 1546 to 1600, was another astronomer whose work was done in the shadows. Brahe built one of the most advanced astronomical observatories of his time, meticulously cataloguing the positions of the stars and planets with incredible accuracy. Yet, like Kepler, Brahe was forced to walk a fine line between science and religion. He often had to hide the true nature of his discoveries, knowing that even the smallest deviation from church doctrine could lead to his downfall. His detailed star charts, which were later used by Kepler to formulate his laws of planetary motion, were the result of years of quiet work, done with a sense of urgency, but also an understanding that the Vatican was watching. These astronomers knew that the stars were more than just distant objects in the sky. They were a key to understanding the universe in a way that the Church did not approve of. But in the silence of their work, these astronomers laid the foundation for modern science. They didn't openly challenge the Church, but they found ways to work around its restrictions, preserving knowledge in hidden texts, cryptic letters, and secret observations. They understood that their discoveries, though crucial to humanity's understanding of the cosmos, had to be kept out of the public eye. The silent astronomers of the Church worked under the shadow of fear, knowing that the Church would not tolerate their work, but still choosing to push forward, laying the groundwork for future generations to understand the stars as they had. Their contributions may have been quiet, but they were no less revolutionary. The stars remained their guides, and in silence they unraveled the mysteries of the universe. Hidden deep within the walls of monasteries across Europe, there existed a treasure trove of forbidden knowledge, a collection of ancient texts and astronomical charts that the Vatican desperately tried to erase from history. These monasteries, often seen as places of quiet prayer and meditation, were also home to some of the most secretive work done in the name of preserving knowledge. The monks who lived and worked in these isolated communities were not only tasked with copying religious manuscripts, but they also secretly maintained libraries filled with forbidden books. The Church had long feared the power of knowledge, particularly the kind that came from outside its control. The ancient teachings of astrology, astronomy, and mathematics were considered dangerous, for they challenged the Church's authority and its rigid interpretation of the universe. So, the Church did what it always did when faced with something it couldn't control. It banned it. Books that contained such knowledge were burned, and scholars who dared to delve into these topics were silenced or excommunicated. But even as the Vatican's power grew, so did the quiet resistance within the walls of monasteries. Monks, many of whom were deeply devoted to their faith, recognized the importance of preserving all knowledge, even if it didn't align with the Church's teachings. In the silence of these monasteries, scholars worked tirelessly to preserve the knowledge that the Vatican sought to erase. They copied texts from ancient Greek and Roman philosophers, transcribed astrological charts, and even studied the stars in secret. Some monks, far from the reach of the Vatican's watchful eyes, began to rediscover the long-forgotten teachings of the ancients. They understood that the stars, the planets, and their movements held a power that the Church could not ignore, and they took it upon themselves to preserve this knowledge for future generations. The writings they copied were not just theological or philosophical, but contained detailed astrological charts, maps of the heavens, and ancient theories of the cosmos that were centuries ahead of their time. These texts were often written in code or hidden in obscure corners of the monastery, their true meaning known only to a select few who understood their importance. Some monks even risked their lives to preserve these texts, knowing full well the consequences of being caught with such forbidden knowledge. The secret work of these monks was not only about preserving knowledge, but also about protecting it from the growing influence of the Church. The Vatican was not just a spiritual authority. It was a political and intellectual power that controlled what was taught and what was kept hidden. By keeping these forbidden texts safe within the walls of the monasteries, the monks ensured that the knowledge of the stars and the heavens would not be lost. The Vatican may have controlled the public narrative, but in the quiet halls of these monasteries, the true knowledge of the cosmos was preserved, waiting for the time when it could be shared once again. This hidden knowledge, buried deep within these monasteries, would later serve as the foundation for the Renaissance, a time when the Church's stranglehold on intellectual life would finally begin to loosen. The monks of the past, though long forgotten, were the silent guardians of a truth that the world was not yet ready to hear. They were the keepers of the stars, the ones who ensured that knowledge would survive, even if it had to be kept in the shadows. In the shadows of the Church's towering influence, there existed a terrifying force that was used to maintain control over knowledge and ideas. This force, known as the Inquisition, was the Vatican's weapon against anyone who dared to challenge its teachings. The Inquisition was a system of religious courts set up to root out heresy, and it was during the height of the Inquisition that astrology, once a respected science, was deemed a dangerous and heretical practice. The Church had long feared the power of astrology, not just because it could predict events, but because it offered an alternative view of the universe. Astrology suggested that the stars and planets, rather than God alone, could shape the course of human events. For the Vatican, this was a direct challenge to its authority. If people began to trust in the stars to guide their lives, they might start questioning the Church's teachings, or worse, its power. So the Church set out to destroy astrology, not only by banning its practice, but by using the full force of the Inquisition to hunt down those who dared to study the stars. The Inquisition was a terrifying institution, one that struck fear into the hearts of people across Europe. From the 13th century onward, the Church used the Inquisition to root out heretics, witches, and anyone who held beliefs that were considered contrary to the teachings of the Vatican. The charges of heresy were often vague, and the consequences were brutal. Those accused of heresy were subjected to torture, forced confessions, and, in many cases, execution. Astrology, once used by kings and scholars as a tool to understand the heavens, was now considered a form of witchcraft, a practice that undermined the Church's teachings and threatened its power. As a result, astrologers became some of the most hunted individuals during the Inquisition. If a person was caught with astrological charts or manuscripts, they were immediately suspected of heresy, and their lives were in grave danger. One of the most well-known astrologers of the time, Michael Servetus, became a victim of the Inquisition's wrath. Servetus, a Spanish physician and scholar, had been studying astrology and the stars for much of his life. He also became known for his religious views, which were at odds with both Catholic and Protestant teachings. His interest in astrology and his controversial ideas on the nature of the universe led to his arrest by the Inquisition in 1553. Accused of heresy, blasphemy, and even astrology, Servetus was condemned to death. His execution by burning at the stake was a clear message to anyone who dared to challenge the Church's views. Death served as a reminder of the dangerous consequences of studying astrology in an era where the Inquisition ruled with an iron fist. But it wasn't just individuals like Servetus who were targeted. The Inquisition actively sought out any knowledge of astrology that had been preserved in hidden texts or secret manuscripts. Books on astrology were burned, and anyone found practicing astrology was branded as a heretic. The Vatican's efforts to suppress astrology were part of a larger campaign to maintain control over knowledge and prevent any competing ideas from spreading. The Inquisition's reach was vast, and its methods were ruthless. Through fear, torture, and death, the Vatican successfully crushed much of the knowledge of astrology, forcing it to be practiced in secret for centuries. Despite the Church's best efforts, however, astrology never truly disappeared. It survived, hidden in the shadows, passed down in whispers, and kept alive by those brave enough to risk everything for the truth of the stars. The Inquisition may have silenced many, but the knowledge of the stars could never be completely erased. It waited, buried deep, ready to be rediscovered. Nestled within the heart of the Vatican lies a place that holds the keys to the stars, a place where the Church's relationship with the heavens is both acknowledged and controlled. The Vatican Observatory, established in 1582 by Pope Gregory XIII, stands as a symbol of the Church's complex and often contradictory stance toward astronomy and astrology. On the one hand, the Church, ever wary of the dangers posed by astrology, sought to suppress it for centuries. But on the other hand, the Vatican understood the power of the stars and planets and the necessity of studying them for both scientific and religious purposes. The creation of the Vatican Observatory was not just an attempt to advance the understanding of the universe. It was also a way for the Church to maintain control over the study of the cosmos, ensuring that it remained in line with its teachings. The Vatican's astronomers were tasked with observing the heavens, tracking celestial events, and making sure that no knowledge of the stars fell into the wrong hands, namely those who would use it to challenge the Church's authority. While the Vatican Observatory became a center for astronomical research, its existence was not without controversy. The Church's support for the study of astronomy was, at times, deeply intertwined with its efforts to control the narrative surrounding the stars. One of the key events that highlighted the Vatican's complex relationship with astronomy occurred in the early 17th century, when Galileo Galilei, one of the most famous astronomers in history, began to champion the heliocentric model of the solar system, the idea that the Earth revolved around the Sun. This theory, which had been proposed by Copernicus nearly a century earlier, directly contradicted the Church's teachings, which held that the Earth was the center of the universe. Galileo's support of the heliocentric model led to his infamous trial by the Inquisition in 1632. The Church's condemnation of Galileo was a clear reminder of the tension between science and religion, a struggle that had played out for centuries. The Vatican Observatory, however, was not just a passive observer of this battle. While the Church's leadership publicly denounced Galileo's ideas, the Vatican Observatory was quietly working to keep up with the advancements in astronomy. The observatory's priests and astronomers were aware of the growing body of evidence supporting the heliocentric model, and despite the Church's official stance, many of them privately agreed with Galileo's findings. This was the paradox of the Vatican's relationship with the stars. Publicly, the Church fought against the spread of certain astronomical ideas, but privately, it understood that the stars and the planets were not simply tools of divine will, but subjects to be studied and understood. Over time, the Vatican Observatory became one of the most respected astronomical institutions in the world, yet its role remained complicated. It was a place where scientific inquiry and religious doctrine had to coexist, sometimes in tension with one another. The observatory's scientists worked to make discoveries about the stars and planets, but always within the boundaries set by the Church's teachings. The Vatican understood that knowledge of the stars could be a double-edged sword. On one hand, it could be a tool for understanding God's creation. On the other hand, it could be a weapon used to challenge the very authority that the Church held over its followers. Despite the Church's careful control, the Vatican Observatory remained a symbol of the ongoing struggle between science and faith. The stars above, once considered forbidden knowledge, had found a home within the very institution that sought to silence them. The question, however, remains: how much of the knowledge gathered by the Vatican Observatory has truly been shared with the world, and how much has been hidden away, locked in the vaults of the Vatican, waiting to be discovered. There are stories whispered in the darkest corners of the Vatican, tales of star charts that have vanished without a trace, charts that could rewrite history. These lost star charts, carefully drawn by astronomers and astrologers over centuries, once held the keys to a knowledge that was too dangerous for the world to know. Some believe these charts are locked away in the Vatican's secret archives, buried deep behind layers of stone and secrecy. Others believe that they were deliberately destroyed, erased from existence by the very people who feared their power. But no matter where the truth lies, one thing is certain. These lost star charts could have revealed secrets that the Vatican was never meant to reveal. The first of these lost charts were created long before the rise of the Vatican's dominance. In ancient times, astrologers and astronomers worked tirelessly to map the stars, believing that the movements of celestial bodies had the power to shape the course of human events. These star charts were seen as sacred, passed down from one generation to the next, carefully preserved in libraries and temples across the ancient world. The Greeks, the Egyptians, and the Babylonians all understood the stars in ways that modern science is only now beginning to comprehend. Yet, as Christianity began to spread across Europe, the Church made it clear that astrology and the study of the heavens would no longer be tolerated. What had once been revered as sacred knowledge was now branded as heretical, a challenge to the authority of the Church itself. By the time the Vatican rose to power, much of the ancient knowledge of the stars had already been lost. Some of the most significant charts and astronomical records had been destroyed, burned in the name of faith. The Church sought to erase any traces of the knowledge that could undermine its teachings, especially the idea that the stars held influence over the fate of mankind. The Vatican feared that if people began to trust the stars, they might start questioning the Church's hold on truth. So the star charts were hidden, locked away in vaults, or destroyed completely. But despite the Vatican's efforts to suppress astrology, there were always those who refused to let the knowledge die. Throughout the Middle Ages, scholars working in secret continued to study the stars, preserving the ancient charts and adding their own discoveries. They knew that the stars held the key to understanding the universe, and they risked everything to protect this forbidden knowledge. These hidden charts were passed down in whispers, tucked away in the shadows of monasteries, far from the prying eyes of the Church. The Vatican's official stance was that astrology was a heresy, but, in secret, many of its priests and scholars understood the importance of this knowledge. The most famous of the lost star charts are those that detail celestial events linked to key moments in history. These charts allegedly show the exact alignments of the stars and planets at critical moments in time, moments that the Church would prefer remained unexplained. Some believe that these charts reveal how celestial events corresponded with the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of kings, and the shaping of religious movements. If these charts were ever made public, they could challenge everything the Church had taught about divine providence and the role of God in shaping history. But as the centuries passed, these charts faded into obscurity. Some were locked away, never to see the light of day. Others were destroyed by those who feared the truth they contained. The lost star charts are now nothing more than a mystery, a tantalizing glimpse into a past that was erased for the sake of control. Were these charts truly lost, or were they hidden away by those who feared the power they might hold? Perhaps the Vatican still holds the answers, but whether they will ever be revealed remains a question that only time will answer. Hidden in the pages of ancient manuscripts, there is a code that has eluded historians, scholars, and even the Vatican for centuries. This code, buried deep within the astrological charts and star maps that the Church tried so hard to suppress, holds secrets that could rewrite the history of both science and religion. The hidden code is said to be embedded in the very fabric of the stars themselves, a cryptic message left by those who understood the universe in ways that the Church was never ready to accept. The Church's fear of this knowledge is not just about astrology or predictions. It's about control over the narrative of history. The hidden code, if it were ever fully decoded, could reveal truths that challenge everything the Vatican has spent centuries trying to protect. Some say this code is embedded in the star charts and ancient astrological texts that were carefully guarded by monks, secreted away in the vaults of monasteries. It's believed that these monks, who worked in secrecy to preserve forbidden knowledge, knew that one day someone would come along who could crack the code. The message it contained wasn't just for any scholar. It was for someone brave enough to face the Vatican's wrath and powerful enough to understand the secrets of the stars. The hidden code is not a simple cipher or a cryptic set of numbers. It's a pattern that runs through the heavens, embedded in the movements of the stars and planets. Astrologers of the ancient world, from the Babylonians to the Greeks, believed that the stars were more than just distant lights. They believed the stars held the key to understanding the divine order of the universe. And within that order, they saw patterns that could predict the rise and fall of kingdoms, the births of great leaders, and the course of history itself. This understanding of the stars was so powerful that when the Church rose to dominance, it saw astrology as a direct threat to its claim on divine knowledge. In order to protect its authority, the Vatican sought to erase these patterns, destroy the star charts, and silence anyone who dared to understand the deeper meanings behind the celestial events. But in the process, they may have inadvertently preserved the very code they were trying to destroy. One of the most fascinating aspects of this hidden code is the belief that it ties together major events in history with the movements of the stars. It is said that key moments, from the rise of empires to the births of revolutionary figures, are linked to specific celestial alignments. Some believe that the secret code contains not just a record of the past, but a guide to the future. It is thought that, if the code were ever fully deciphered, it could reveal not only what has happened, but what is yet to come. Those who have tried to decode this message have found hints within the stars themselves, like the alignment of planets during significant historical events. These alignments, when studied carefully, seem to form a pattern that points toward a deeper understanding of how the universe and history itself works. The Vatican's efforts to suppress astrology and astrology's deeper truths may have had an unintended consequence: the creation of a hidden record of knowledge that still exists today. The code is not just about astrology. It's about understanding the very structure of the universe, about seeing the connections between the heavens and the earth. The stars were never meant to be just a tool for prediction. They were meant to be a map, a guide to understanding the forces that shape our world. The Church, in its attempt to suppress this knowledge, may have inadvertently preserved it in the very charts and manuscripts it tried to erase. This hidden code still waiting to be cracked, holds the potential to unlock secrets that have been hidden for centuries. And it's up to those who dare to look to the stars to uncover the truth that lies within. In the quiet corners of history, there are stories of astronomers who held a secret so profound that it could change everything we thought we knew about the stars. These astronomers, who devoted their lives to studying the heavens, discovered something that the Vatican would have never allowed to be shared with the world. The secret they uncovered was hidden not just in the movements of planets and stars, but in the very fabric of the universe itself. It was a secret about the cosmic forces that shape our world, a truth so powerful that it posed a direct threat to the Church's control over knowledge. The astronomer's secret wasn't a single discovery, but a collection of hidden truths pieced together over centuries. It was the realization that the stars and their movements held a deeper meaning than what the Church had led people to believe. The Church, fearing what this knowledge could mean for its power, moved quickly to suppress it, hiding the truth from the world. One of the most famous astronomers to uncover part of this secret was Galileo Galilei, who lived from 1564 to 1642. Galileo, often called the father of modern science, made groundbreaking discoveries that forever changed our understanding of the universe. He was one of the first to use a telescope to observe the stars, and in doing so, he uncovered a world that had been hidden from human eyes for centuries. He saw moons orbiting Jupiter and the phases of Venus, evidence that not everything in the heavens revolved around the Earth, as the Church had long taught. Galileo's discoveries threatened to unravel the very foundation of the Church's teachings. Therefore, Church's leaders were not interested in the truth of the stars. They were concerned with maintaining their authority. As Galileo's observations challenged the Church's view of the universe, the Vatican moved to silence him, forcing him to recant his findings and condemning him as a heretic. But Galileo was not alone in his search for the truth hidden in the stars. There were other astronomers, scholars, and thinkers who, over the centuries, pieced together bits of this forbidden knowledge. Some of these astronomers worked in secret, knowing that their discoveries could lead to their downfall. They studied the stars not just for scientific reasons, but to unlock the mysteries of the universe that the Church had long kept hidden. They discovered that the stars weren't simply distant lights, but part of a vast, interconnected system that governed not only the heavens, but the very structure of life on Earth. Some of these astronomers even began to suspect that there was a hidden code embedded in the stars, one that could reveal secrets about the future of humanity, about the rise and fall of civilizations, and about the forces that shape human destiny. The astronomer's secret wasn't just about discovering new planets or charting stars. It was about understanding the universe in a way that had never been allowed. It was the knowledge that the stars were more than just objects to be studied. They were a map, a guide to understanding the divine order of the universe. The Vatican understood the power of this knowledge, and for centuries it worked to keep it hidden. But as more and more astronomers began to uncover the secrets of the heavens, the Church's hold on knowledge began to slip. The secret of the stars, once buried deep within the vaults of the Church, slowly started to leak out. The astronomer's secret is still there, waiting to be fully understood, hidden in the night sky, and waiting for someone brave enough to uncover it. Throughout history, there has been one word that has haunted astrologers scholars, and anyone who dared to look beyond the teachings of the Church. That word is heresy. For centuries, astrology was seen not just as a practice that could influence the lives of individuals, but as a direct challenge to the Church's authority. The idea that the stars could hold secrets or offer insights into the future was considered an affront to the very concept of divine will. The Church believed that only God could control the fate of mankind, and the idea that human lives could be guided by celestial forces was too much of a threat to ignore. Astrology, once an honored science in ancient civilizations, became labeled as heresy, a forbidden practice that went against the teachings of Christianity. Those who practiced it, whether they were astrologers, philosophers, or even kings, were branded as heretics, often persecuted and silenced for their beliefs. In the 16th and 17th centuries, as Europe experienced a time of great intellectual and scientific discovery, the Church's stance on astrology hardened. The rise of figures like Copernicus and Galileo, who challenged the geocentric view of the universe, set off a ripple effect that threatened to unravel the Church's authority over knowledge. Copernicus, who lived from 1473 to 1533, proposed the radical idea that the Earth was not the center of the universe, but rather that the planets, including Earth, revolved around the Sun. This theory went against everything the Church had taught for centuries. Yet, even Copernicus's discoveries were tied to astrology. He used astrological charts to support his astronomical theories, believing that the movements of the stars and planets were connected to the divine order of the universe. This connection between astrology and scientific discovery only made the Church's reaction more intense. The Church's response to astrology was swift and unforgiving. In 1632, the Inquisition put Galileo on trial for heresy after he publicly supported the heliocentric theory. He was forced to recant his findings, and his works were banned. Galileo's ideas, which had challenged the Church's teachings, were seen as dangerous, not only because they contradicted Scripture, but because they questioned the very authority of the Church itself. The Church's condemnation of Galileo was a clear signal that any knowledge, including astrology, that threatened to shake the Church's control over truth would not be tolerated. The Church's actions against Galileo and other astronomers made it clear that those who explored the stars and the cosmos were walking a dangerous path. The label of heresy became a tool for silencing those who dared to look beyond the accepted religious narrative. Astrology was not only suppressed in the public sphere, but was systematically erased from the academic and intellectual world. Books on astrology were burned, and scholars who practiced it were forced into hiding. The Church's efforts to eliminate astrology were not just about controlling the practice itself, but about controlling knowledge itself. By declaring astrology a heresy, the Church ensured that no alternative view of the universe could compete with its version of reality. The Church sought to dominate not only the souls of its followers, but also their minds, shaping their understanding of the stars, the heavens, and the world around them. But despite the Church's efforts, astrology did not die. It lingered in secret, passed down through generations of scholars who continued to study the stars in defiance of the Church's censorship. The astrological heresy, while condemned by the Church, never fully disappeared. It was kept alive in hidden manuscripts, underground societies, and the quiet work of those brave enough to continue their studies. Even though the Church sought to silence astrology, it remained a silent rebellion. Secret that could never be completely erased. The astrological heresy didn't just challenge the Church's teachings, it questioned the very nature of the universe and humanity's place within it. And that, in the eyes of the Church, was the most dangerous heresy of all. Behind the stone walls of the Vatican, hidden from the public eye, there lies a chamber unlike any other. Known as the Star Chamber, this secretive room holds more than just ancient texts and star charts. It is said to be the heart of the Vatican's hidden knowledge, a place where the Church's most powerful figures meet in secret to study the stars and planets in a way that the world has never seen. The Star Chamber has been shrouded in mystery for centuries, its purpose veiled in secrecy, and its existence known only to a select few. The Church, throughout its long history, has had a complicated relationship with astrology and the stars. While publicly condemning astrology as heretical, it has privately acknowledged the power of the stars and their influence over human affairs. The Star Chamber was created not just to observe the heavens, but to control what was known about them. It was a place where the Church's most trusted astronomers and astrologers gathered to study celestial events, but also to keep this knowledge hidden from the public eye. The Vatican's fear of astrology was rooted in its deep need for control. The stars, after all, were not simply decorative points of light in the sky. They were believed to be an expression of divine will, guiding the fate of nations, kings, and individuals. The Church understood that if the knowledge of astrology were to spread, it would challenge its authority, undermining its control over the lives of its followers. This is why the Star Chamber existed in secrecy, why its records were kept locked away in hidden vaults. The Church didn't want the world to know that its leaders were studying the stars, using astrology to make decisions about everything, from politics to the timing of religious events. The Star Chamber wasn't just a room for observation, it was a place for planning and strategizing, where those in power would use the stars to guide their decisions in a way that was kept far from the eyes of the public. The secrecy surrounding the Star Chamber was so intense that no one outside the Vatican's inner circle knew of its existence until much later in history. Even the few scholars who were allowed to work with the Church's astronomical data were not told of the room's true purpose. They were given only fragments of information, enough to keep the Church's hold over the study of the stars, but not enough to ever fully understand what was truly hidden in the Star Chamber. The room itself is said to be filled with centuries of astronomical charts, star maps, and manuscripts that track the movements of the stars and planets. Some believe that these charts contain knowledge that the Church has never wanted the public to see, charts that reveal not just the cycles of the heavens, but patterns that could change the way we understand history and destiny. The Church's control over the Star Chamber wasn't just about keeping knowledge hidden, it was about shaping the future. The Vatican understood that knowledge of the stars could be used to guide events, from the rise of empires to the birth of influential figures. It's said that the Church used the Star Chamber to track celestial events that would coincide with important moments in history, aligning the timing of its decisions with the heavens. In a way, the Church was using astrology not just to predict the future, but to influence it, ensuring that its power remained unchallenged. While the Star Chamber remained hidden, the knowledge contained within it continued to shape the course of history, a secret that only a few had access to, and even fewer could fully comprehend. The stars, once seen as forbidden knowledge, became a tool of control, locked away in the heart of the Vatican, and only those who truly understood their power could unlock their secrets. In the face of centuries of suppression, a quiet rebellion began to stir in the world of astronomy. It was a rebellion born from the very stars that the Church had tried so hard to control. The astronomers and scholars who had once worked in secrecy, under the shadow of the Vatican's harsh restrictions, now began to push back against the Church's hold over knowledge. This rebellion, unlike any other, wasn't fought with swords or armies, but with telescopes, star charts, and an unyielding thirst for truth. The astronomical rebellion was not an isolated event, but a movement that spanned generations. It began with the likes of Copernicus, whose revolutionary idea that the Earth revolved around the Sun shook the foundations of the Church's teachings. Copernicus, who lived from 1473 to 1533, had dared to question the geocentric model of the universe that the Church had held for centuries. His ideas were so radical that they were considered heretical, and even though Copernicus published his theories in the early 16th century, they were not fully accepted until long after his death. Yet, the Church could not silence the growing movement. As the years went on, more and more astronomers joined the rebellion, unwilling to be intimidated by the Church's wrath. Galileo Galilei, perhaps the most famous of these rebels, took the torch from Copernicus and carried it forward. Galileo, whose discoveries with the telescope proved the heliocentric theory to be true, was publicly condemned by the Vatican in 1632 for supporting a model of the universe that contradicted Church doctrine. Galileo was forced to recant his findings, and his works were banned. Despite the Church's efforts to suppress him, Galileo's discoveries spread throughout Europe, inspiring a new generation of astronomers to continue the work he had started. The astronomical rebellion was not just about proving the heliocentric theory, though. It was about challenging the Church's monopoly on knowledge, about asserting that the pursuit of truth was more important than the preservation of power. As more astronomers began to look at the stars with their own eyes, they realized that the heavens held more secrets than they could have ever imagined. These astronomers, many of them working in the shadows, started to see the stars in a new light. They saw the movements of the planets and the stars as more than just objects in the sky. They saw them as keys to understanding the very fabric of the universe. They began to piece together a cosmic puzzle, one that not only challenged the Church's teachings, but also threatened to expose the secrets the Vatican had been keeping hidden for centuries. The rebellion wasn't just a fight for scientific progress, it was a fight for intellectual freedom, for the right to understand the world without the constraints of religious dogma. By the end of the 16th century, the astronomical rebellion had gained momentum, and the Church could no longer control the flow of knowledge. The discoveries made by these astronomers, who had once been branded heretics, became the foundation for modern astronomy. What started as a small, quiet movement eventually exploded into a revolution that changed the course of history. The stars, once the domain of the Church, became the domain of the people. The astronomical rebellion proved that knowledge couldn't be locked away forever, no matter how hard the Vatican tried to suppress it. The stars above had once been a symbol of divine authority, but now they became a symbol of rebellion, a reminder that the pursuit of truth could never truly be stopped. The astronomical rebellion had won, and with it, the universe was forever changed. Throughout history, there have been moments when knowledge itself was deemed so dangerous that it was cast aside, excommunicated from society. This was not the excommunication of a person, but the very ideas that challenged the established order. One of the most profound examples of this came during the time when the Church sought to rid itself of any knowledge that could potentially undermine its control over the truth. The excommunication of knowledge was not just a physical act of destruction, but a systematic erasure of ideas that could free the mind from the grip of dogma. The Church's need for control over knowledge wasn't just about religious teachings, it was about power. The Vatican understood that knowledge could be a threat to its authority, and as such, it sought to silence anything that could challenge its version of the world. Astrological charts, once used to predict the future and guide rulers, became symbols of heresy. When figures like Galileo Galilei came along in the 16th century, bringing with them discoveries that could shake the very foundation of the Church's worldview, they were branded as heretics, and their knowledge was cast aside as a dangerous force. In the early years of the scientific revolution, the Church faced the rise of thinkers who questioned the accepted truths about the universe. The most famous of these thinkers was Galileo, who, in 1632, was put on trial by the Vatican for supporting the heliocentric model of the solar system. His discoveries, which proved that the Earth revolved around the Sun, went against centuries of Church teachings. The Vatican's response to Galileo's findings was swift and brutal. He was forced to recant, and his works were banned. The Church's condemnation of Galileo's ideas was not just about silencing one man, it was about protecting its own narrative of the world. The Church's fee wasn't just of a single idea, but of the consequences that the spread of this idea could have on its power. If the Church could control knowledge, it could control how people saw the world, and more importantly, how they saw the Church itself. But the excommunication of knowledge went beyond just the banning of books and ideas. The Church sought to suppress entire fields of study, particularly astrology and astronomy, which were deeply tied to the very fabric of the universe. The study of the stars had long been a means of understanding the world and one's place in it. But when it began to challenge the Church's teachings, it was exiled. The Church's attempt to erase astrology wasn't just a matter of doctrine, it was about controlling the future. Astrology had long been used by rulers and commoners alike to understand what lay ahead, but once it was seen as a challenge to the authority of the Church, it was branded as heresy. The excommunication of astrology meant the rejection of an entire system of knowledge, and the Church's control over the stars was complete. Yet, despite the Church's best efforts, the excommunication of knowledge was never fully successful. Knowledge has a way of surviving, even when it is pushed to the margins. For centuries, astrologers, astronomers, and scientists worked in secret, passing down their forbidden knowledge from one generation to the next. The Church may have tried to silence them, but the truth of the stars could not be erased. The excommunication of knowledge was a temporary victory for the Vatican, but in the end, the stars refused to remain hidden. Over time, as more and more scholars began to question the Church's authority, the knowledge that had been cast out slowly began to find its way back into the world. The excommunication of knowledge was a lesson in the dangers of controlling information, and a reminder that truth, no matter how much it is suppressed, has a way of returning to the light. There is a power in the stars that has been recognized for centuries, a power that reaches beyond the simple beauty of the night sky. The stars have long been seen as more than just distant points of light. They have been understood as guides, shaping the destinies of nations, kings, and individuals. The ancient world believed that the stars held secrets about the future, that their movements could predict everything from personal fate to the rise and fall of empires. Even as the Church sought to suppress astrology and control the knowledge of the heavens, it understood, perhaps more than it admitted, that the stars held a profound power. This power was not just in the ability to predict the future, but in the ability to understand the forces that shaped the universe. The Church, with its need to control every aspect of life, saw this power as a threat. If the people were to understand the influence of the stars, they might begin to question the authority of the Church itself. In the minds of those in power, knowledge of the stars could lead to a loss of control over the people. For centuries, the Church worked tirelessly to suppress the study of astrology and astronomy. Knowledge of the stars was branded as heretical, and those who sought to understand them were silenced. The most famous of these figures was Galileo Galilei, whose discoveries in the early 17th century challenged the Church's teachings and led to his condemnation. Galileo, armed with a telescope and an unrelenting curiosity, revealed to the world that the Earth was not the center of the universe, as the Church had long insisted, but merely one of many planets revolving around the Sun. His findings shook the very foundation of the Church's understanding of the cosmos. Yet even as the Church condemned him, it couldn't escape the knowledge he had uncovered. The stars, once used to control the people's understanding of the world, were now proving that the universe was far more complex than anyone had imagined. Despite the Church's efforts to keep the power of the stars hidden, that power could not be contained. The knowledge of the stars, though suppressed for centuries, was never fully lost. Scholars, astronomers, and astrologers continued to study the heavens in secret, preserving their findings in hidden texts and codes. They knew that the stars held not only the key to understanding the past, but the potential to unlock the future. The power of the stars lies not just in their ability to predict the future, but in the way they connect everything in the universe. The stars are a map, a guide to understanding the very fabric of reality itself. This understanding of the stars has always had the potential to change the way humanity sees itself and its place in the universe. It was never just about predicting the future. It was about understanding the forces that drive the world, forces that are written in the movements of the heavens. Over time, as the Church's control began to loosen, the power of the stars began to shine once again. With the advent of the scientific revolution and the Age of Enlightenment, the stars were finally allowed to be studied openly once more. The work of astronomers like Copernicus and Kepler, who had once been branded as heretics, became the foundation for modern science. The stars, once controlled by the Church, were now free to be explored and understood by all. Yet, the question remains: why did the Church fight so hard to keep this knowledge hidden? The answer lies in the power that knowledge held. The stars weren't just a tool for prediction. They were a key to understanding the universe, a universe that the Church could not fully control. The power of the stars was not just in their ability to predict the future, it was in their ability to reveal the truth about the world and humanity's place in it. And that truth, once hidden from the public eye, is now free to be understood by anyone who looks up at the night sky. For centuries, the Vatican has been seen as the guardian of spiritual knowledge. But beneath its religious teachings, there have always been whispers of deeper secrets. One of the most closely guarded of these secrets is the Vatican's use of astrology, particularly in the form of prophecies tied to the stars. While the Church has long publicly condemned astrology as a heresy, some believe that the Vatican has secretly relied on astrological prophecies to guide its decisions, particularly in moments of crisis or transition. These prophecies, hidden in star charts and celestial alignments, may have shaped key moments in history, from the rise of popes to the timing of critical events. Throughout history, the Vatican has been accused of using astrology to determine when certain actions should be taken. For instance, when a new pope was chosen, certain celestial events may have been used to guide the decision. The Church has never officially admitted this, but many believe that the timing of papal elections, along with certain key moments in the Church's history, were influenced by astrological alignments. These secret prophecies, if they exist, may have been kept within the walls of the Vatican, shared only with the highest-ranking members of the Church. They were likely passed down through generations, carefully recorded in ancient texts and hidden manuscripts, ensuring that only those deemed worthy could access the power of the stars. Astrological prophecies are not new. Ancient civilizations, from the Babylonians to the Egyptians, used astrology to predict the future and make important decisions. The Vatican, too, would have known of the power that the stars held. However, as Christianity spread, the Church sought to control this knowledge, seeing astrology as a threat to its authority. The Vatican's stance on astrology may have been a way to suppress it publicly while still using it privately. It's possible that the Church saw the stars as a tool for understanding the will of God, but only for those within its inner circle. During the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, the Vatican was at the height of its power. Some of the most significant astrological events during this time may have been carefully recorded and interpreted by the Church's scholars and astronomers. These prophecies could have been used to predict the outcomes of wars, political upheavals, and even the fates of monarchs and rulers. The Vatican's use of astrology may not have been limited to just predicting the future. Some believe that the Church also used astrological prophecies to reinforce its authority, ensuring that certain events unfolded in a way that strengthened the Church's grip on power. The Vatican's secret reliance on astrology may also explain its careful attention to celestial events. There are records of the Church observing rare astronomical phenomena such as solar eclipses, comets, and planetary alignments, all of which were seen as powerful omens. These events, believed to signal important changes or transitions, may have been interpreted through an astrological lens to guide the actions of the Church. While the Church officially condemned astrology, it likely understood the potential power of these celestial signs. If the Vatican ever relied on these astrological prophecies, it would have done so in secrecy, knowing that the public would never accept the idea that the Church used such methods to guide its decisions. Even though the Vatican has always publicly rejected astrology, it is possible that the stars, with their predictable movements and patterns, became an invisible hand, guiding the Church's actions throughout history. As the centuries passed and the scientific revolution began to challenge the Church's authority, the Vatican's use of astrology may have become more covert. The Church, under increasing pressure from new ideas in science and philosophy, would have been careful to hide its reliance on astrological prophecies, even as it continued to use them behind the scenes. The Vatican may have even gone so far as to erase any traces of astrological practices from its official records, ensuring that the knowledge of the stars remained hidden. Today, the Vatican still holds a vast collection of ancient manuscripts, many of which are kept in its secret archives. These texts may contain not just religious documents, but also astrological charts and prophecies that the Church has kept hidden for centuries. The Vatican's astrological prophecies, if they still exist, remain one of the greatest untold secrets of the Church, locked away in the vaults of history, waiting to be uncovered. There is a moment in history when reason itself was overshadowed by the darkness of control, when the very act of questioning the world around us became a threat to those in power. This moment, known as the eclipse of reason, occurred at the height of the Church's dominance over Europe. During this time, the Vatican's stranglehold on knowledge and intellectual thought cast a shadow over the minds of millions. The stars, once seen as a pathway to understanding the universe, were now hidden behind a veil of fear and dogma. The Church's rejection of science, particularly the study of the stars, led to a period where reason and inquiry were eclipsed by superstition and blind faith. The belief that the stars held secrets about the future, and could even influence human affairs, was deemed heretical, and anyone who dared to study them was condemned. Figures like Galileo Galilei, whose discoveries challenged the very foundations of the Church's teachings, became victims of this intellectual darkness. Galileo's support for the heliocentric model of the solar system, the idea that the Earth revolves around the Sun, put him directly at odds with the Church. In 1632, after years of silence and secrecy, the Vatican publicly condemned Galileo for his ideas. He was forced to recant his findings and was placed under house arrest for the rest of his life. Galileo was not the only victim of this eclipse. Across Europe, intellectuals, scientists, and philosophers were persecuted for daring to challenge the Church's authority. The Inquisition, a tool used by the Church to suppress dissent, was in full force, silencing anyone who questioned the official narrative of the world. During this time, knowledge about the stars and the natural world became a forbidden subject. Books were burned, scholars were executed, and entire fields of study were deemed heretical. The Church's fear of losing control over its followers led to a systematic effort to extinguish the light of reason. What was once seen as a divine gift, human curiosity, was now a crime punishable by death. The eclipse of reason was not just a moment in history. It was a long, drawn-out period where the very act of thinking for oneself became a dangerous endeavor. However, despite the Church's best efforts, reason could not be completely suppressed. The scientific revolution, which had already begun in the early 16th century, was unstoppable. Men like Copernicus, Kepler, and Newton refused to be silenced. Their discoveries, although often met with resistance and fear, gradually began to reshape humanity's understanding of the universe. Even as the Church continued to fight against these new ideas, the tide of intellectual progress could not be turned back. The eclipse of reason, while casting a long shadow over Europe, was not permanent. It was, in fact, only a temporary darkening of the intellectual world. As the scientific revolution continued to gain momentum, the light of reason began to shine once again. The stars, once hidden behind the Church's veil of control, slowly began to reveal their secrets to the world. By the time the Enlightenment arrived in the late 17th and 18th centuries, the eclipse of reason was coming to an end. The ideas of reason, science, and free inquiry began to take hold across Europe. The Church, still powerful, but no longer able to control every aspect of life, found itself in retreat. The stars were once again studied openly, and astrology, though still considered controversial, was no longer seen as a heresy. The eclipse of reason had not lasted forever. It was replaced by an era where the pursuit of knowledge was seen as a noble endeavor, not a threat to be feared. But the scars of that dark period remain. The battle between faith and reason, between knowledge and control, has shaped the course of history and continues to influence the way we view the world today. The eclipse of reason may have ended, but the struggle for knowledge and truth goes on. After centuries of suppression, the star charts, once considered heretical and hidden away in the darkest corners of history, began to make a slow but steady return. The scientific revolution had ignited a spark that couldn't be extinguished, and as the world moved into the Age of Enlightenment, the stars that had been once seen as forbidden became symbols of knowledge and exploration. By the late 17th century and into the 18th century, intellectuals and astronomers were no longer bound by the chains of religious dogma that had silenced them for so long. They began to rediscover the ancient wisdom that the Church had worked tirelessly to suppress. The charts of the heavens, which had been hidden away in secret archives or dismissed as superstition, were now being unearthed once again. These ancient star maps, which had been used by cultures like the Greeks, Babylonians, and Egyptians to understand the cosmos, were now being studied with fresh eyes. What had once been seen as heresy was now viewed as a key to understanding the universe. The Church's control over knowledge, though still powerful, was weakening, and the stars, those celestial bodies that had been watched and studied for thousands of years, were now being embraced once more. The reawakening of the star charts was not just a scientific breakthrough, it was a cultural shift. For centuries, the Church had claimed dominion over all knowledge, and anyone who sought to understand the stars outside the Church's teachings was branded as a heretic. Yet, with the dawn of the Enlightenment in the 18th century, this monopoly on knowledge was challenged. Intellectuals began to question the established order, and the pursuit of truth, especially through science and reason, became the guiding principle of society. With this new mindset, the study of astrology and astronomy flourished. The star charts that had once been banned were now regarded as invaluable records of human history. They were not just about predicting the future, but about mapping the universe, understanding the patterns of nature and connecting with a deeper truth about the world around us. As astronomers like Johannes Kepler and Isaac Newton made monumental discoveries about the laws of physics and the movement of the planets, the ancient star charts provided a roadmap to the past, a key that unlocked a hidden world of celestial knowledge. The rediscovery of the star charts was a quiet revolution, one that took place not on battlefields, but in libraries and observatories, among the minds of those brave enough to look beyond the veil of religious control. These astronomers were not just exploring the heavens for the sake of curiosity. They were unlocking the mysteries of the universe that had been deliberately hidden. By the 19th century, the study of stars and planets was no longer seen as the realm of heretics, but of scholars, and the Church could no longer suppress the flow of knowledge that had once been theirs to control. The reawakening of the star charts marked the beginning of a new era, one where the pursuit of truth was seen as a noble endeavor, not a threat to authority. The stars, which had once been forbidden knowledge, were now symbols of human progress, guiding us toward a greater understanding of our place in the universe. Yet, as the star charts began to re-emerge, there were still those who feared their power. The Church, which had once fought so hard to control the stars, watched as the world embraced the idea that the heavens were not under their control, but were part of a grander, more complex system that no one, not even the Vatican, could fully understand. The stars were no longer just a tool for prophecy. They were a part of a universal truth that belonged to all of humanity. The reawakening of the star charts was not just the return of forgotten knowledge. It was the return of a new way of seeing the world, one that was driven by reason, curiosity, and the desire to understand the cosmos. The stars had finally been freed from the shackles of secrecy, and with their return, humanity's understanding of the universe would never be the same again. For centuries, the stars have been seen as mysterious, distant lights in the sky, offering beauty and wonder to those who gaze up at them. Yet, there is more to these celestial bodies than meets the eye. Beneath their twinkling surface lies a hidden truth, one that has been obscured for generations by those in power. The stars are not just random points in the sky. They are a map, a guide to understanding the universe and, perhaps, even the very nature of existence itself. The truth in the stars has always been there, waiting to be uncovered by those willing to look beyond the veil of fear and superstition. The ancient world understood this truth better than most, using the stars not only for navigation, but as a way to connect with the divine. They believed that the stars held the answers to life's biggest questions, from the nature of the soul to the purpose of existence. For them, the stars were not just a backdrop to human life. They were a part of it, intricately woven into the fabric of reality. As time passed, however, these teachings were overshadowed by the rise of religious authority, particularly the Catholic Church. The Church's need to control knowledge and dictate the way people viewed the world led to a centuries-long suppression of the ancient wisdom embedded in the stars. Astrology and the study of the heavens were deemed heretical, a challenge to the Church's teachings, and anyone who sought to understand the stars was branded a heretic. But even in the face of this suppression, the truth in the stars could not be erased. Great thinkers like Copernicus, Kepler, and Galileo, though condemned by the Church, continued to push the boundaries of human understanding. They understood that the stars held secrets about the universe, and their discoveries shattered the Church's tightly controlled narrative of the world. The heliocentric model proposed by Copernicus in 1543, which stated that the Earth revolved around the Sun, was one of the most profound challenges to the Church's teachings. Galileo's observations of Jupiter's moons in 1609 further confirmed this theory, leading to his eventual trial by the Inquisition. Yet, despite the Church's efforts to silence them, these astronomers' discoveries changed the course of history. They showed the world that the stars weren't just for the Church to control, but a universal truth that belonged to everyone. As the centuries passed, more and more astronomers and scholars began to look to the stars, not as symbols of divine power, but as guides to understanding the natural world. The scientific revolution in the 16th and 17th centuries, fueled by the discoveries of these brave thinkers, began to peel back the layers of ignorance that had been placed over the stars. What was once hidden in the shadows of superstition and fear was now brought into the light, revealing the stars as a key to unlocking the mysteries of the universe. The truth in the stars is not just about understanding the cosmos. It's about understanding our place within it. The study of the stars offers insights into the cycles of life, the interconnectedness of all things, and the deep mysteries that govern the universe. The more we learn about the stars, the more we learn about ourselves. Today, the stars are no longer seen as mysterious forces that control our fate. Instead, they are seen as part of a vast and complex system that governs the entire universe. The study of the stars has led to incredible advances in science and technology and has given us a deeper understanding of the world around us. But perhaps the greatest truth the stars reveal is that we are all connected, part of a larger cosmic order that is still waiting to be fully understood. The truth in the stars is not just about what we can see, it's about what we are willing to discover. The stars, once hidden and suppressed, are now free for us all to explore. The journey to understand the truth in the stars has only just begun. And with each discovery, we move closer to unlocking the secrets of the universe. A universe that is far more intricate and beautiful than we could have ever imagined.